Today, I want to talk about recruitment as far as looking for corporate jobs, just because of how frustrating the entire landscape is. And I'm really going to be taking a look at my perspective, recruiters, and then the macro context. Once I get all those three together, we'll kind of just get straight into the emotional part, because this entire piece here is going to be purely logical. So, as a person looking for a job, one of the things you're probably doing day by day, especially if you're unemployed, is applying to different opportunities, meeting up with different people, and preparing up for interviews, and then going through the actual process. The problem is, the job market hasn't really been the same since, I want to say, 2020. Post-COVID, 2021, 2022, there was a bit of a jump as far as, companies wanting to hire a lot more talent, because, there were a lot more opportunities. People could go back to the office, things of the sort. Then, honestly, that lasted for about a year, maybe. And then, I want to say 2023, it was still okay. But then, OpenAI had been developing ChatGPT for a long time. And when they officially released a model that could actually do a lot more than what traditional AI models could do, the question then became, okay, how can we use this in the day-to-day workflow? And I think the area that was hit the hardest is one that isn't really talked about that much, because there are so many opportunities in the space, and people who belong to this kind of type of work don't really like talking about things that affect the work, because they have this false sense of security that their job is protected because it's what America is pushing you to do and going to college and getting a good job. And of course, I'm talking about white collar kind of work. Anybody that I've worked with in my years of corporate experience always kind of approaches their work as something they convince themselves to be more important than actually is. And because of that, and all the work and effort they put in to get to that position, they're very protective about it. And in that protection, does everybody kind of collectively buy into some kind of delusion, which is why you hear so much jargon thrown in the corporate space from the lowest rungs to the highest, because that's how we really hide ourselves from, saying, oh, we're not actually as smart or as talented as we are, and I'm wondering why I'm even getting paid the amount that I'm getting paid being in this job. So I think what AI really did was kind of take away some of that element of illusion, because as people who were working in those jobs began to use the technology, they realized, wait a minute, this is literally automating so many different parts of what I do day to day, and I can see how this is going to take away my job. And as software engineers started getting removed, people who, quite frankly, needed a high skill gap and needed much harder education than a typical business degree started getting thrown out because of better AI kind of technologies. The white collar space kind of frazzled up and said, okay, well, this effing sucks, because if they're getting removed, who's to say we're not next? And so I guess I can appreciate for AI doing that, because I think one of my biggest issues with being in corporate is how nobody was ever direct about anything. And it was purposely made by that. It was, made that way intentionally, so to speak. And so it's harder than ever to get a job because of all these different developments. And I, as a candidate, am constantly applying for jobs, talking to different people, preparing for interviews, and it is so damn near impossible to get better, because candidates don't really receive the feedback that they want from these interviews, and companies have so many people coming in that they don't even have time to be able to give the feedback. And so it's kind of like, imagine you're running on a hamster wheel, but the hamster wheel is really, really big, and so you see a lot, but at the end of the day, you're kind of ending up at the same exact spot, toiling endlessly away. And one thing you hear about people who go through the job process is it's really a black box. Nobody really understands how the entire job process works, because everybody that interviews you is going to have a different perspective on what the job requires, and is going to be looking for different answers to the same exact question. Now, what I mean by that is, yes, there are rubrics, there are kind of structures set in place to avoid this, but people ultimately are the reason why the recruitment cycle area is such a black box. I actually think this is why services that promise to get you a job and land you an offer are often seen as something that can definitely get you from A to Z, but never fully go 100% of the way, because people know that it's impossible to guarantee a success rate of higher than 90%. And I may be wrong here, but I think in the space of recruitment, it's extremely frustrating because it's hard to know what you need to get better at. And you can kind of do some self-aware kind of pieces here and there. But sometimes what you optimize for one interview of the exact same role, exact same position at a similar sized company is going to be wildly different from what exact carbon copy company is looking for, simply because of the people that are working in these teams. So now we're going to kind of move the needle over to recruiters and talk a little bit about why they are kind of in this weird position. So a recruiter is basically just paid in both salary and bonus to bring in the most quality candidates and say, okay, here is who I'm going to send to the hiring manager and the rest of the interview team, and they will then decide who's best fit for the role. The thing is, whenever a candidate is eventually removed from the running or even gets the job and then, let's say, is fired for bad performance, it often comes down the pipeline of what questions could we have asked better to gauge his understanding and his actual competencies for the job. And then back to the recruiter asking the question of what did you ask them and what could we improve in our screening process for you to make sure that we're receiving the best candidates possible. And so they have this weird pressure put onto them in which their quality as a recruiter and therefore ability to, get other people in the door into other opportunities really comes down to how good are you at determining how well people are actually able to perform from a screening interview alone. And so, they have a pressure, of course, to not be able to accept everybody, and they're only able to look at so many applications at once, and they're probably receiving, at this point, probably 1,000 a day. So, it's kind of tough getting a candidate, especially for these, high fidelity kind of companies that are pretty popular. Google, Apple, the works. Everybody has a referral at this point, and it's kind of like if you don't have a referral, then you're not going to make it through. And for a recruiter, a referral is more of a kind of piece that says, okay, I will take a look at your application, and that's it. But I'm not going to give you any special treatment. I think if you're trying to work at a really large company, your referral game has to be to the point where you're talking to 20 people in the team, and by some virtue of God, know the goddamn CEO. And so it must feel like an uphill battle for someone to interact with the recruiter when you have this knowledge that a recruiter is probably getting coffee chat requests from hundreds of other people. And so part of the frustrating part about participating in the corporate job market is it's impossible to stand out because the recruitment kind of, I guess you could say, ecosystem is one where people are constantly trying to stand out using the exact same format. It's one thing to look at the creator economy and then find out how people find their niche, but when you're applying for a job, all your resumes have to look the exact same. The only way you can differentiate yourself is by maybe just you're able to wordsmith your resume a little bit better to fit with what the job is looking for, and you're able to just interview a lot better. And so it becomes quite frustrating because it's hard to just differentiate yourself in the space. And so to make myself feel better, I take a look at the macro context of recruitment and try to understand that everybody's dealing with the exact same issues. Everybody's trying to stand out and get a job. But it sucks because you kind of I think what a lot of American school systems do, especially when you get into prestigious universities, is sell you a dream that may have worked 40, 50 years ago, and we're still trying to sell that dream because nobody has tried to question the authority of academia in creating branding, to the point that when you go out into the workforce, there is no restitution for you if you're not able to get a job. It becomes less about the dream that was sold to you, more about how good are you as an individual. And it actually really sucks because when you're applying and interviewing, you're thinking about the hundreds of other people who are applying, and then you ask yourself the question, why me? Like, out of everybody else, there's probably someone who is a much better candidate than me. Why am I even, like, trying to apply for this role? And so I think because there are so many people trying to vie for the same exact position, recruitment becomes less of a numbers game and more of one, and this is just for me, by the way, so take it with a grain of salt, but for me, it becomes an exercise in comparing myself to my everyday man. People I've never even seen or know, but I know they're out there applying and interviewing. And it sucks because you go through the process, you go through all these rounds of interviews, you don't get the offer, and they don't even want to give you feedback. And it really just, it's to the point where it comes down to, did you write a follow-up email, or, you know, did they like your hairstyle? That's what I'm going to go with. And so, yeah, I kind of just wanted to talk about this today because I'm honestly had it up to here. And I feel like every day I say I've had it up to here with job stuff. But, you know, I think having a really good support system is what matters and what kind of keeps you going through the entire process of, you know, looking for a job. But I sometimes do feel bad because people keep supporting you and they're working. And, you know, when someone's working, time probably goes by a lot faster for them. And for you who doesn't have a job, it goes by slower. And I don't know, every day you're kind of just wondering, what am I going to tell my family? What am I going to tell my significant others, friends, so they don't look at me as a bum because I can't find a job because I'm not good enough as I said I was. So, yeah, it kind of sucks on a self-esteem kind of level. And so I've now resorted to talking about my thoughts on YouTube because this feels like a fairer game. So, yeah, thanks for listening. See ya.